How many times have you found yourself thinking, okay, I'll be happy when I get that
Mm.
promotion, or maybe when I buy that new car or find the right person. And then, well, you get there, you hit the when, and the goalpost it just moves again, right? It reminds me a bit of my kids when they were really little. They'd beg for one toy, just one specific thing, promising, this is it. I won't want anything else ever.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, that promise lasted, what, maybe 5 minutes, if that?
It's such a deep contradiction in our lives, isn't it?
Right.
We're surrounded by, unprecedented levels of comfort, technology, endless opportunities.
You'd think we'd be ecstatic.
Exactly. You'd think, okay, this is it, contentment unlocked. But the reality of the data, it tells a completely different story.
Hmm.
We're seeing anxiety disorders hitting something like 40 million adults in the U.S. alone every year.
Wow.
And depression rates, they've apparently tripled over the last decade. Divorce rates hovering around 50%.
Hmm.
And addiction.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just substances anymore, right? It's tech, it's achievement, it's almost anything. It's just rampant.
That's a huge gap you're pointing out. All this modern progress, but happiness seems to be, well, decreasing for many. So what does this ancient wisdom say? What's the root cause here? What's the very first thing these texts tell us about why we keep failing in this happiness chase?
Well, today in this deep dive, we're really going to get into that. We're exploring insights from ancient Indian philosophy, mainly the Srimad Bhagavatam and the Bhagavad Gita. And these aren't just, dusty old verses. They're often described as real game changers. They contain what many call the key that unlocks everything about the soul's journey, our search for real, lasting freedom.
Hmm.
So our goal here is to take you, the listener, beyond fear and falsehood. We want to offer a fresh perspective on life, on death, and ultimately sketch out a kind of modern path to that enduring freedom they talk about.
And it sounds like right from the get-go, these texts just flip everything on its head, especially how we think about birth. I was struck by that line from Srimad Bhagavatam 3.31.45 you shared. It says, when one begins to view the physical body as one's very self, that is called birth. Well,
Exactly.
just that one idea, it totally shifts how you look at, well, everything, existence itself. Actually, before we dive deeper, maybe just take a second, you listening. Think about the last thing you really wanted, like really, really desired.
Got it. Okay, now think. How long did that feeling of satisfaction, the happiness from getting it, how long did it actually last?
It's a great question to ask because that specific verse, Srimad Bhagavatam 3.31.45, it really nails what these texts see as, well, maybe the greatest case of mistaken identity ever. Our culture, it often tells us, find yourself. But what does that usually mean? It means buy this thing, achieve that status, get that look, things that represent who you think you are.
Right, defining ourselves externally. Precisely. But the Bhagavatam says, look, the first ignorance is to identify one's material body as the self. And the second follows right from that. To accept something as one's own due to a bodily connection. So this isn't just some vague self-help advice. It's a very specific diagnosis of our fundamental mistake, and it starts the moment we think, this body, that's me.
And you see this mistake playing out everywhere today, don't you? I mean, people constantly say things like, oh, I am successful purely based on their bank account. Or I am attractive because of how many likes they got on a photo. Or I am valuable because of their job title. We sort of intellectually know, yeah, money can't buy happiness, but let's be honest. How many of us check our bank balance when we're feeling a bit down, hoping for a little lift?
It's almost instinctive.
Yeah. And there's that sociological idea, the looking glass self, right? It suggests our self-image is heavily influenced by how we imagine other people see us. We're constantly thinking, I am who I think you think I am. So our sense of self isn't coming from inside necessarily, but from reflecting these external judgments.
That's it perfectly. And this is not some new modern problem. These ancient texts, they're basically saying we are born into this misunderstanding. Just like that verse says, one commentary points out that our miserable life begins from the moment the living entity begins to contact his material body.
Wow. From the very start.
Think about it. I mean, can you raise your hand if you remember the experience of being born?
No, definitely not.
Right. Nobody does. We come into this world completely dependent, vulnerable, and according to these texts, immediately forgetting our actual spiritual nature. We adopt this mistaken identity right from the beginning.
So if our self-image is so tied to that looking glass self, how do these texts suggest we build, like an inner core, something resilient? It sounds a bit like it connects to that old idea of temperance, doesn't it? Self-awareness that isn't just surface level.
Absolutely. Temperance, or you could say self-control, self-awareness, it becomes crucial. Because if the texts are right, We're essentially born into this fundamental identity crisis. We inherit a default setting that's constantly pointing us in the wrong direction.
Okay.
And from that moment, we spend our lives basically trying to make temporary things feel permanent. It's like, imagine entering a huge cosmic play. The moment we put on this physical costume, this body, we forget we're the eternal actor inside.
Yeah.
And then we spend the whole play trying to make the cardboard scenery feel like a permanent home, convinced that if we just play our temporary role perfectly, we'll somehow rewrite the entire script of the universe.
That's a really powerful way to put it, and it leads right into what these texts describe as, well, the universal trap, desire binding us. What if the very things we chase for happiness, our greatest pleasures, are actually building our prison? The Bhagavatam uses this image of material attraction, especially sexual desire, being like a blind well covered with grass. Looks appealing, maybe safe on the surface, but it's actually a dangerous trap, a fundamental misdirection of our deep need for connection.
And it's deeper than just simple wanting or craving. It's about where we're directing our fundamental spiritual energy. You know, looking at modern things through this lens is fascinating. Take social media addiction. These ancient texts would suggest it isn't just about clever algorithms.
Okay.
It's a meticulously designed system that exploits that very mistaken identity we talked about. It constantly reinforces the delusion that I am who I think you think I am. Those likes. They're just tiny temporary pats on the back for a self that isn't even the real you, leaving you feeling ultimately perpetually kind of empty.
But hold on. Many people would argue that desire is, the engine of progress. It's the drive that makes us improve things, achieve things. How do these ancient texts square that with calling desire a trap or using that blind well analogy for so much of modern life?
That's a really important question. They don't advocate for just sitting back and doing nothing, like apathy. It's more about redirection than elimination. The problem they point out is that the more we try to satisfy these purely material desires, the stronger they often get. That little hit of temporary satisfaction fools us into thinking the next hit will be the one that lasts forever.
Okay. The addictive cycle.
Exactly. We become like addicts, always needing bigger, better, newer experiences just to feel okay, or maybe even just normal. And it's truly eye-opening when you start to see how often we fall into this. I mean, I'll admit, even knowing this philosophy, I've caught myself thinking my immediate happiness somehow depends on, like, my Wi-Fi speed working perfectly.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
Or getting that new gadget.
Yeah.
It's such a common human thing to believe that this one purchase, this one achievement, that'll be the permanent fix we've been looking for.
This leads us perfectly into what feels like the really revolutionary insight, the core idea about not just birth, but also death. Srimad Bhagavatam 3.31.45 and 46 clarifies this so powerfully. It says, when one begins to view the physical body as one's very self, that is called birth. Okay, we covered that. Then, when the physical body, the place where perception of objects occurs, is rendered incapable of perceiving, that is known as death. The living entity, who is the seer of both the eyes and the sight, loses his power of vision in the same way. The living entity, who is the seer, remains.
So see, death in this view, it's simply the machine breaking down. The instrument, the body stops working. But it's not the destruction of the user, the seer, the soul.
The seer remains.
The seer remains.
Yeah.
And birth, as the text says, it's just accepting a new instrument, a new body, and unfortunately identifying with it all over again. And this is why these texts introduce something often called the higher taste principle. You can't just fight off material desires with sheer willpower. It rarely works long term.
Right.
You need a higher taste. Something genuinely more fulfilling. And this isn't just about swapping one habit for another, like switching from smoking to chewing gum. It's the truly radical idea that real spiritual connection offers a satisfaction, a joy so profound that it naturally makes the pull of those lesser material pleasures just fade. Not because you're forcing yourself, but because they seem pale in comparison to this superior experience.
So the Bhagavatam's path towards that higher taste is often called Krishna consciousness, which at its core seems to mean developing a real conscious connection to the divine, often through specific practices that raise our awareness. So it's not about suppressing desire, it's redirecting it.
Exactly.
Not denying the world, but transforming our relationship to it. Not aiming for emptiness, but for genuine, deep fulfillment. So instead of, say, endlessly scrolling social media for that little hit of external validation,
You could engage in spiritual practices like mantra meditation for a genuine inner connection.
or instead of constantly shopping to try and buy an identity,
You could dedicate some time to serving others with a real sense of purpose.
Yeah, and relationships change too, right? They become less about finding someone to complete you and more about mutual growth.
Right. And achievements aren't just for boosting your ego or your status, but they're sought as a way to contribute, to serve.
Okay, so how do we actually cultivate this? What are the practical steps based on this wisdom?
Well, the transformation is often described as being supported by three key pillars, all drawn from these texts. First, there's chanting, or you could broadly say spiritual practice. The texts really emphasize the power of sound, particularly the Maha Mantra. They say it's so powerful it can be chanted even within the abdomen of one's mother. This Krishna consciousness cannot be checked in any circumstance.
Wow.
So practically, you could start with just say 10 minutes of focused mantra meditation each day. Or try mindfully repeating a mantra during routine things like washing dishes or commuting. Group chanting kirtan is also powerful for building that community feel.
That leads nicely to the second pillar, association, or finding a spiritual community. This wasn't explicitly in the verses we focused on, but the broader sources definitely stress its importance. Things like seeking out one person interested in spiritual growth, maybe joining a study group or a meditation class. We really do become like the people we spend time with.
Absolutely critical. A spiritual community offers alternative values, reinforcement, and vital support, especially when those old ingrained patterns try to pull you back. It's about consciously choosing environments that feed your spiritual self, not drain it.
Okay, chanting, association. What's the third pillar?
The third is service, or finding a spiritual purpose. The underlying principle here is that everything can be engaged in the service of the Lord. Nothing should be used for one sense gratification. This really shifts your focus. It moves you from constantly trying to accumulate things for yourself to letting energy and resources flow through you for the benefit of others. From pure self-interest to helping, it's a profound shift in why you do what you do, seeing your talents not just as yours, but as tools for a higher good.
So, what does this living free actually look like in day-to-day life? Because it's definitely not about, faking detachment or pretending you don't care about anything.
No, not at all.
It's not about rejecting everything material, moving to a cave, pretending the body doesn't exist, or just crushing all your desires. In fact, sometimes trying too hard to be detached just makes you realize how attached you actually are.
That's so true. True renunciation, as these texts explain it, isn't about giving things up necessarily. It's about using everything you have, everything you are, in service of that higher purpose we talked about.
Okay, so give us some examples, like a student.
Okay, a liberated student,
Maybe.
they study diligently, they work hard, but they aren't totally crushed if they don't get the top grade. They can celebrate success without letting it inflate their ego. And crucially, they think about how they can use their education to help others, not just advance themselves.
What about someone working? A professional?
A liberated professional, they strive for excellence in their work, absolutely. But their identity isn't solely wrapped up in their career. They might earn good money, but they aren't owned by it. They find meaning and purpose that goes beyond the job title on their business card.
Makes sense. And maybe a parent?
A liberated parent, perhaps, loves their children deeply, fiercely, but without that clinging possessiveness. They guide them, support them, but without needing to control their every move. And importantly, they try to model those deeper spiritual values.
And what if someone's single?
A liberated single person. They're content being on their own, feeling whole within themselves, rather than desperately searching for someone else to complete them. But they're also open to relationships, seeing them as potentially enhancing life, not defining it. And maybe they focus their energy on serving their community, rather than solely on finding a partner.
It comes back to that core idea, doesn't it? As one text puts it, the soul is eternal, just changing costumes in the cosmic play. You're the player, not the costume.
Exactly. You are the seer, not just the scenery you happen to be looking at right now. Now, this is definitely a journey, not an overnight fix. So we thought it might be helpful to suggest a kind of 30-day experiment you could try.
Ooh, I like that.
It's easy to, want to transcend the ego while secretly wanting everyone to notice how spiritual you're becoming.
Huh. Yeah, the spiritual ego trap.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is about genuine, practical change, applying these insights directly.
Okay, week 1, what's the focus?
Week 1 is all about awareness. Just start noticing. Notice when you define yourself by external things, your job, your relationship status, your possessions. Catch those thoughts like, I am my job, or I am this relationship, or I am what I own. And then consciously, gently, practice introducing a different thought and affirmation. I have a spiritual being having a human experience. This directly challenges that mistaken identity the texts warn us about.
I like that. Simple but powerful. Okay, week 2.
Week 2, we move to redirection. So when you feel that pull, that craving for something external, maybe it's food, maybe shopping, maybe validation online, just pause. Pause and ask yourself honestly, what am I really seeking here? What's the deeper need? This connects directly to that higher taste principle. And as a practical step, maybe try just 5 minutes of mantra meditation when you feel that emptiness or restlessness.
Ugh.
It's a simple way to introduce that higher taste.
Got it. Week 3.
Week 3 is association. Make a conscious effort. Maybe seek out just one person you know who's interested in spiritual growth and have a real conversation. Or perhaps look into joining a local or online study group, a meditation class, maybe a service project. And importantly, also be mindful about limiting time with people or situations that consistently seem to drain your spiritual energy. Your environment really does shape your inner state.
That makes sense. Protect your energy. Okay, final week, week 4.
Week 4 is dedicated to service. The challenge here is to commit to one small act of service each day without expecting any recognition or reward. Just do something kind or helpful. Think about using your unique talents, whatever they are, to help someone else. And practice really seeing everyone you interact with, the grumpy cashier, the annoying coworker, everyone as a spiritual being fundamentally just like you on their own journey. This embodies that principle of using everything in service.
That's a great framework for 30 days. So how would you know if this experiment or just this path in general is actually working? Are there signs?
Yeah, there are some pretty clear, maybe even slightly unsettling warning signs you might be making progress.
Warning signs. Okay.
Well, for instance, old pleasures, things you used to really enjoy, might start to feel a bit empty, less satisfying.
Oh, okay.
You might find you genuinely care less about what other people think of you. Their opinions just don't hold the same weight.
That would be freeing.
Definitely. Also, challenges and setbacks will still happen. Life still happens. But they won't shake your core sense of identity quite so much. You'll feel more anchored.
Resilience.
Exactly. You'll likely start to feel more connected to something larger than your individual self. And perhaps surprisingly, you might notice a decrease in cynicism and a genuine increase in compassion, even for difficult people.
Those are good signs. They all seem like natural results of understanding you're the eternal seer, like the texts say, not just the temporary experience.
Precisely.
Now, for listeners who feel inspired and want to go deeper, what resources would you recommend?
Absolutely. For books, a fantastic starting point is always Bhagavad Gita as it is. It's foundational.
Okay.
Also, The Science of Self-Realization compiles relevant writings. It is very accessible. And then for a really deep dive, you can explore the Srimad Bhagavatam itself, where our main verses came from.
And what about finding that community, the association aspect?
Good question. You could look into local ISKCON temples or centers if there are any near you. There are also many online study groups these days focusing on these texts and various meditation communities that might resonate.
And specific practices to explore.
Well, Kirtan groups, group chanting can be incredibly powerful and uplifting. Engaging in online spiritual discussion forums can be helpful too. And seeking out practical service opportunities connects directly to that third pillar.
So, wrapping up this deep dive, what's the ultimate promise here? What's the big takeaway?
The promise is essentially liberation. The texts themselves state it quite clearly. One who is intelligent by the grace of the Lord and develops Krishna consciousness is successful in his life because simply by keeping himself in Krishna consciousness, he will be saved from the repetition of birth and death. Freedom from that cycle.
And what does that freedom feel like day to day? What changes might someone expect if they really internalize this?
Well, several things tend to shift. Your fear of death naturally decreases because you start to really understand, maybe even feel, your own eternal nature. Your attachment to specific outcomes, needing things to go exactly your way, it lessens. You start trusting there's a larger purpose unfolding.
Okay.
That constant need for external validation, it shrinks because you begin to know your inherent worth isn't dependent on what others think or what you achieve.
That sounds peaceful.
It is. Desperation in relationships tends to soften because you feel more complete within yourself. You're not looking for someone else to fix you or fill a void. And generally that constant gnawing anxiety about the future diminishes because you're living with a deeper spiritual purpose. You know you're the eternal player, remember, not just the temporary part you're playing right now.
So it seems the choice really lies with each of us listening.
Absolutely. You really have 3 basic options, don't you? 1, you can hear all this and just ignore it. continue the usual cycle of chasing desires, getting fleeting satisfaction, feeling disappointed, and repeating. 2, you could intellectually appreciate it, say, that's interesting, but fundamentally change nothing about how you live your life. Or 3, you could choose to take just one small, practical step toward exploring this spiritual freedom for yourself. Today. Starting now.
A powerful choice. And maybe to help ponder that, we should leave everyone with that profound quote we discussed right from the source itself. A final thought on who we really are.
Yes, let's end with that. From Srimad Bhagavatam 3.31.4546. When one begins to view the physical body as one's very self, that is called birth. When the physical body, the place where perception of objects occurs, is rendered incapable of perceiving, that is known as death. The living entity, who is the seer of both the eyes and the sight, loses his power of vision. In the same way, the living entity who is the seer remains.